I'm at my computer for once, using my Blue Yeti microphone, which is why this is binaural, at least I think it is, it should be. Unless I forgot to change the setting on my microphone to the correct one. Anyway, tonight I thought I would read for you an article that I found on Facebook earlier that I relate to and that maybe you might relate to too. So, here it goes. Actually, let me split the screen a little bit so we can read and chat at the same time. Okay. Maybe I should copy video URL. Let's tweet it out, I guess, as well, before I start reading. Hi there. Turn the resolution down on my preview so that I don't affect my latency too much. Okay. Go to my other Twitter. Excuse me. Don't know what I'm doing wrong. Hello, viewer. Sorry for the delay. I should have prepared a little better for this stream. We're about to read an article about unceasing suicidal ideation and how it's sort of a everyday reality that some of us contend with. Okay. Finally, I'm on Twitter so I can share this stream out and then proceed with reading. Your tweet was sent. Oh dear, it's not going to do it. Delete tweet. Try again. There we go. Alright, sorry about the delay. Now we can continue. Here goes. From theoutline.com. I am not always very attached to being alive. Chronic, passive, suicidal ideation is like living in the ocean. Let's start talking about how to tread water. By Anna Borges. Content warning. This essay contains vivid language about suicide and suicidal thoughts. I wish there was a nicer way to say this, but I don't always want to be alive. Right now, I don't actively want to kill myself. I don't have a plan. I don't check the majority of the boxes on lists of warning signs for suicide. I have a life I enjoy, and I am curious about the future. But the fact remains, I don't always feel strongly about being alive, and sometimes, on particularly bad days, I truly want to die. It's been a long time since that statement felt anything but mundane. In middle school and high school, there were the morbid poems, the self-harm, the overwhelming emotions that everyone dutifully labeled teen angst. In college, there were nights when I drank too much, and the protective barriers keeping my depression at bay faded to nothing, and the thought came to me, unbidden, as seductive as it was scary. I want to die. Eventually, I finally stumbled my way into treatment. After that, I celebrated each birthday with surprise, because each age I hit was one I had assumed I wouldn't reach. At 27, I've settled into a comfortable coexistence with my suicidality. We've made peace, or at least a temporary accord, negotiated by therapy and medication. It's still hard sometimes, but not as hard as you might think. What makes it harder is being unable to talk about it freely, the weightiness of the confession, the impossibility of explaining that it both is and is not as serious as it sounds. I don't always want to be alive. Yes, I mean it. No, you shouldn't be afraid for me. No, I'm not in danger of killing myself right now. Yes, I really mean it. How do you explain that? In the United States, nearly 45,000 people die by suicide every year, making it the 10th leading cause of death in the country. On average, there are 123 suicides a day. That's not counting those who survive attempts, estimated to be about 1.4 million in 2017. And those are just the statistics we can track. What we don't know is how many people live in the nebulous gray space between fleeting thought and attempt, those dealing with passive, not active, suicidal ideation. Research on people who endure passive suicidal ideation is limited by this innate stigma that it's a bad, wrong thing, so people are less likely to report it, said Eric Beeson, licensed counselor and faculty member at Northwestern University's Counseling at Northwestern, whose research includes attitudes about suicide. Without self-reports, and in the absence of the hospital visits or attempts that help us track active ideation, it's nearly impossible to measure. Say suicide and people don't imagine your indifference towards life, your passive fantasies. There's no single cause of suicidality. It's a symptom of borderline personality disorder and is associated with mood disorders like depression and bipolar, though not everyone with those disorders automatically wants to die. But that doesn't begin to cover it. Suicidality is also prevalent in those with autism spectrum disorders, chronic pain conditions, substance abuse issues, and marginalized identities like LGBT youth. And though that accounts for both passive and active ideation, it's the latter that eclipses most conversations on the subject. Take how we react to suicides in the news, especially of celebrities or public figures. The outpour of shock and devastation is always palpable. We had no idea they were struggling. If only someone had stepped in. You never know what someone is dealing with. There are calls to action. Reach out to someone. Get help. Call this number. For a few days, we flood Twitter with reminders that no one is immune to suicide, not even celebrities whose lives seem perfect to us. This is true. No one is immune. At the same time, the sense of alarm and urgency in these sentiments gives the impression that suicidality is solely standing on the brink, inches from death, waiting desperately for someone to notice and intervene. And that's how it is for some people. But for me, and I suspect for countless others like me, the threat of suicide isn't like being carried over a waterfall. It is like living in the ocean. Not as sea creatures do, native and equipped with feathery gills to dissolve oxygen from my bloodstream, but alone, with an expanse of water at all sides. Some days are unremarkable, floating under clear skies and smooth waters. Other days are tumultuous storms you don't know you'll survive, but you're always, always in the ocean. And when you live in the ocean, treading to stay afloat, you eventually get the feeling that one day, inevitably, there will be nowhere for you to go but down. I've become adept at treading. I know, or I suspect, or I dread, that my legs will exhaust, and I will slip beneath the surface. But I don't want it to be soon. For now, I can and want to keep my head above water. But will is never enough, and so I have learned to surround myself with ways to stay afloat. Some are like passing driftwood, living to see the series finale of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, finishing that book that's been taking up brain real estate for years. The prospect that maybe tonight will be the night I meet someone halfway decent on Tinder. They are shallow motivators, hardly anchors to life. But sometimes you just need something that will get you through the month, or the week, or the night. Others, medication, my crisis safety plan, my cats who depend on me, the awful thought of transferring my suffering to my loved ones, are more sturdy. These are the life preservers. Chronic suicidal ideation takes so many forms. It can be fantasizing about passing during sleep, developing a terminal disease, dying in a tragic accident. Or it's background noise, a staticky station whispering taunts you can almost but never entirely tune out. It hits some people only in the dead of night, or when they've been drinking. Others completely at random, like a flash storm they have to wait out. Suicidality exists on a continuum, and frankly, we're all on that continuum somewhere, Beeson told me. Some of us are just closer to an actual suicide death than others. But in many ways, we are all a few life experiences away from a major mental health crisis, whether we like to admit it or not. Besides, that word is loaded in its own way. Say suicide, and people don't imagine your indifference towards life, your passive fantasies. There is the alarm and the awkward platitudes, given either too seriously or too lightly. And anyone who's ever broached the topic in therapy might know the ensuing questions of risk evaluation. In the past few weeks, have you wished you were dead? Do you wish you didn't have to go on living? Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? Are you having thoughts of killing yourself? Sometimes I worry that's what people around me would do if I were honest with someone other than my therapist and a few close friends about this lack of attachment to life and the sometimes desire to be rid of it. After they know my default state, will I be self-conscious? Will I regret it? Will they ever forget it? Or will I shadow my every move and our every conversation? Will they become too aware, watch me too closely? But then I think, isn't there middle ground between hypervigilance and complete secrecy? Speaking freely need not solely carry the weight of prevention. It can simply be about the comfort of social connectedness and knowing you are not alone. What if we acknowledged the possibility of suicidality all around us, normalized asking and checking in? If people talked about feeling suicidal, not joked, as we've all started to do online, but really talked, as much as they talked about feeling depressed or anxious, would we finally be forced to see how common it is and start creating space for these conversations? Would it be the worst thing in the world if we started talking about not wanting to be alive and what might help keep us here? Of course, even that doesn't have a straight answer. We really don't know the impact of having more more casual conversation about suicide. April Foreman, licensed psychologist and executive board member at the American Association of Suicidology, told me, "Stigma is lower than it's ever been, and suicide rates are as high as they were during the Great Depression. If reducing stigma alone saves lives, the suicide rates should be going down." But speaking freely need not solely carry the weight of prevention. It can simply be about the comfort of social connectedness and knowing you are not alone. Like Beeson told me, the big picture is not as much about preventing suicide as it is about planning life and fostering social connectedness, which in and of themselves are major preventative factors. As for the inherent awkward corners and sharp edges of talking about suicide, I figure if I can live with the discomfort of wanting to die sometimes, people can live with the discomfort of knowing about it. If it sounds like I have accepted my fate, resigned myself to the pull of the ocean floor, I haven't. But if I had, it would not be for lack of trying. Outside of anecdotal evidence, scientists just don't know a ton about passive suicidal ideation, which means they also don't know much about how to treat it. People think we understand more about suicide than we actually do, said Foreman. We have invested very, very little into research on suicide, especially on feeling chronically suicidal. But at a certain point, when you're having that mood all the time, something is happening inside your body. Something's wrong, and we don't understand what yet. There are some more extreme treatments that can be effective, like electroconvulsive therapy and ketamine, but even with those, research is preliminary, and scientists don't quite know why they work, just that they sometimes do. There's hope of more effective treatment, just not without money for research or laws that demand a certain standard of care for those enduring suicidal ideation. Turns out, my method of coping is apparently pretty effective. In the absence of good science, one of the most helpful things you can do for chronic suicidality is curate your collection of flotation devices. According to Foreman, if mental health care can only do so much to reduce our feelings of suicidality and equip us with the tools we need to tread water, then it's crucial to nourish a life full of things we want to stay afloat for. I thought I wasn't allowed to write about this until I made it to the mythical other side. You hear it all the time. When you write about a personal experience, especially one that is dark and unpalatable, you should be far, far removed from that time in your life to process it in writing. You should have a lesson, a realization, a moral, a triumph, an ending. But I might want to die forever. That's just how it is. But in the meantime, I need to talk about the treading. Do I hope that one day I won't feel like this? Of course. But according to Foreman, it may not be the case that we can entirely eliminate suicidal thoughts and feelings, yet or ever. And I'm done pretending that this is a fight I'm guaranteed to win if I only try hard enough instead of something I can at least manage. Because I can manage it, and the ocean is nice sometimes. The sun comes out and the current calms, and I can find peace in the drifting. Maybe there isn't hope of land in the distance. Maybe sometimes there is. Maybe that's not the point. Perhaps what I'm looking for isn't land at all, but other people out here with me, trying and treading and learning to live in the water. In the meantime, some life preservers in case you need them. If you are thinking about suicide or just need someone to talk to right now, you can get support from any of the resources below. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. Crisis Text Line, text HOME to 741-741. International Suicide Hotlines, a comprehensive resource list for people outside the U.S. IMA Live. Click chat now to access a live online network of volunteers through instant messaging. Trevor Lifeline, Trevor Chat, and Trevor Text. LGBTQ plus crisis support. 1-866-488-7386 or text Trevor to 1-202-304-1200. Trans Lifeline, United States, 877-565-8860. Anna Borges is a writer, editor, and mental health advocate. Previously, she was a senior editor and writer for BuzzFeed. Her first book, The More or Less Definitive Guide to Self-Care, comes out in October. An Oregon native, she lives in Brooklyn with her 2 cats. Visit her website, annaborgeswrites.com, or say hi to at Anna Borges on Twitter. That's weird. Her Twitter handle is an anagram of her actual name. Well, viewers, I hope you enjoyed listening to that article about suicide and sort of comfort for it. Or comfort for the temptation, I should say. Parts of it reminded me of another bit, or what would be the word, mosaic, or anthology, or montage, maybe. Montage of Sam Harris's work. There's a montage called It Is Always Now that someone put together of some of Sam Harris's quotes. If I could find a transcript for that, I would read it for you. But if you'd rather me talk about something else or read something else, let me know in the chat. For now, I think I'm going to go tag Anna on Twitter about this, in which I read. Oops, I'm sorry about the typing loudness. Okay. That's tweeted. Sorry. My thermos is kind of a little squeaky. Oops. Copy. I just want to see if maybe I'm missing chats or something. No, chat appears to be working. Alright, forgive me for the awkward pausing and stuff. I'm going to try to find that transcript of Sam Harris's stuff, since no one's saying anything in chat, just so I can continue reading. Sam Harris. It Is Always Now transcript. Okay, there's the YouTube video, but I need the transcript. His wiki quote might have to do. I don't know. Or maybe we could read like Alan Watts or something. That's kind of what it would remind me of as well. Okay. Someone on Reddit appears to have posted a pretty accurate transcript of the 6-minute montage known as This Is Always Now, or It Is Always Now. So I'm going to go ahead and read that for y'all, I suppose. Here it goes. It Is Always Now by Sam Harris. It is always now. I actually want to talk today about death. Now, most of us do our best to not think about death. But there is always part of our minds that knows this cannot go on forever. Part of us always knows that we are just a doctor's visit away or a phone call away from being starkly reminded with the fact of our own mortality or of those closest to us. Now, I'm sure many of you in this room have experienced this in some form. You must know how uncanny it is to suddenly be thrown out of the normal course of your life and just be given the full-time job of not dying or of caring for someone who is. But the one thing people tend to realize at moments like this is that they wasted a lot of time when life was normal. It's not just what they did with their time. It's not just that they spent too much time working or compulsively checking email. It's that they cared about the wrong things. Their attention was bound up in petty concerns year after year when life was normal. And this is a paradox, of course, because we all know this epiphany is coming. Don't you know this is coming? Don't you know that there's going to come a day when you'll be sick or someone close to you will die, and you'll look back on the kinds of things that capture your attention and you'll I think this transcript's not perfect, and you'll tend to, what was I doing? You know this, and yet, if you're like most people, you'll spend most of your time in life tacitly presuming you'll live forever. Watching a bad movie for the 4th time, or bickering with your spouse. These things only make sense in light of eternity. There better be a heaven if we're going to waste our time with that. There are ways to really live in the present moment. What's the alternative? It is always now. However much you feel you may need to plan for the future, to anticipate it, to mitigate risks, the reality of it is now. Now, this may sound trite, but it's the truth. It's not quite true as a matter of physics. In fact, there is no now when it comes to the entire universe. You can't talk of an event occurring simultaneously here and at the same time occurring in Andromeda. The truth is, now is not even well defined as a matter of neurology. Because we know that inputs to the brain come at different moments and that consciousness is built upon layers of inputs whose timings have to be different, our conscious awareness of the present moment is, in some relevant sense, already a memory. But, as a matter of conscious experience, the reality of your life is always now. Now, I think this is a liberating truth about the nature of the human mind. In fact, I think there is probably nothing more important to understand about your mind than that if you want to be happy in this world, But the past is a memory. It is a thought arising in the present. The future is merely anticipated. It is another thought arising now. What we truly have is this moment, and this, and this. And we spend most of our lives forgetting this truth, repudiating it, fleeing it, overlooking it. And the horror is that we succeed. We manage to never really connect with the present moment and find fulfillment there because we are continually hoping to become happy in the future, and the future never arrives. Okay. Even when we think we're in the present moment, we're in very subtle ways, always looking over its shoulder, anticipating what's coming next. We are always solving a problem. And it is possible to simply drop your problem, if only for a moment, and enjoy whatever is true of your life in the present. This is not a matter of new information or of more information. It requires a change in attitude. It requires a change in the attentiveness you pay to your experience in the present moment. It is always now. Pretty good. I think Sam's version is better, though. Any other reading requests or topic requests or trigger requests or I do have one more article that kind of reminded me of if you want. I'll go ahead and pull it up. It's called A Brief Version of Time by Alan Lightman. Pretty sure I've read it at least once on this channel somewhere before, but that's okay. The New York Times, Archives, 1993, Opinion. A Brief Version of Time by Alan Lightman. Published February 8th, 1993. Suppose that people live forever. Strangely, the population of each city splits into two, the laters and the nows. The laters reason that there is no hurry to begin their classes at the university, to learn a second language, to read Voltaire or Newton, to seek promotion in their jobs, to fall in love, to raise a family. In endless time, all things can be accomplished. Thus, all things can wait. Indeed, hasty actions breed mistakes. And who can argue with their logic? The laters can be recognized in any shop or promenade. They walk an easy gait and wear loose-fitting clothes. They take pleasure in reading whatever magazines are open, or rearranging furniture in their homes, or slipping into conversation the way a leaf falls from a tree. The laters sit in cafes, sipping coffee, and discussing the possibilities of life. The nows note that with infinite lives, they can do all they could imagine. They will have an infinite number of careers. They will marry an infinite number of times. They will change their politics infinitely. Each person will be a lawyer, a bricklayer, a writer, an accountant, a painter, a physician, a farmer. The nows are constantly reading new books, studying new trades, new languages. In order to taste the infinities of life, they begin early and never go slowly. And who can question their logic? The nows are also easily spotted. They are the owners of those cafes, the college professors, the doctors and nurses, the politicians, the people who rock their legs constantly whenever they sit down. They move through a succession of lives, eager to miss nothing. When two nows chance to meet at the hexagonal pilaster of the Zahringer fountain, they compare the lives they have mastered, exchange information, and glance at their watches. When two laters meet at the same location, they ponder the future and follow the parabola of the water with their eyes. The nows and laters have one thing in common. With infinite life comes an infinite list of relatives. Grandparents never die, nor do great-grandparents, great-aunts and great-uncles, great-great-aunts, and so on, back through the generations, all alive and offering advice. Sons never escape from the shadows of their fathers, nor do daughters of their mothers. No one ever comes into his own. When a man starts a business, he feels compelled to talk it over with his parents and grandparents and great-grandparents ad infinitum to learn from their errors. For no new enterprise is new. All things have been attempted by some antecedent in the family tree. Indeed, all things have been accomplished, but at a price. For in such a world, the multiplication of achievements is partly divided by the diminishment of ambition. And when a daughter wants guidance from her mother, she cannot get it undiluted. Her mother must ask her mother, who must ask her mother, and so on forever. Just as sons and daughters cannot make decisions themselves, they cannot turn to parents for confident advice. Parents are not the source of certainty. There are 1,000,000 sources. Where every action must be verified 1,000,000 times, life is tentative. Bridges thrust halfway over rivers and then abruptly stop. Buildings rise 9 stories high, but have no roofs. The grocer's stocks of ginger, salt, cod, and beef change with every change of mind, with every consultation. Sentences go unfinished. Engagements end just days before weddings. And on the avenues and streets, people turn their heads and peer behind their backs to see who might be watching. Such is the cost of immortality. No person is whole, no person is free. Over time, some have determined that the only way to live is to die. In death, a man or a woman is free of the weight of the past. These few souls, with their dear relatives looking on, dive into Lake Constance, or hurl themselves from Montelima, ending their infinite lives. In this way, the finite has conquered the infinite. Millions of autumns have yielded to no autumns. Millions of snowfalls have yielded to no snowfalls. Millions of admonitions have yielded to none. Okay. And that in turn reminded me of another quote I like from Looking for Alaska by John Green. Imagining the future is a kind of nostalgia. You spend your whole life stuck in the labyrinth, thinking about how you'll escape it one day, and how awesome it will be. And imagining that future keeps you going, but you never do it. You just use the future to escape the present. That's pretty much all I can think of to read for the time being. Unless I can find something about that dragon cancer, which I also was reminded of earlier. hope you don't mind, dear viewers, but I will be right back. I will leave the stream on for a minute or two while I use the restroom. Feel free to comment and chat if you have any questions or ideas or requests, or even just compliments or complaints, you know. Alright, I will be right back. Don't go anywhere. Alright, I'm back. And I thought of something else I could read. But because it is a physical book, I had to turn on the big light in my room. This is something long enough that one of us is going to fall asleep before it's over. Excuse me. Put my headphones back on so I can monitor a bit. Let's see. You can still hear me, right? Testing, testing. Okay. What else do I need to do? Oh, yeah. Sorry, give me one more second. Hey, we have a third viewer. Hello, third viewer. We have just been reading assorted articles and quotes about staying alive, I guess you could say. Persevering, persisting. And I was about to continue reading another such article, but first I must get something going on my computer. See, I keep transferring gigantic games to and from my external hard drive in order to update them. And it takes a long time, so I figured it could be going in the background. So yeah, forgive me for the intermission and the rambling. almost done, almost done. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Sorry. I forgot that it would do that. Okay, that's going. So I shall continue reading, unless you have any other ideas. Or unless I get really tired and decide to go to sleep or something. Okay. So hopefully this is as apt as I thought it might be. And as enjoyable as I thought it might be. Okay. Going to page 335. Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Dogs are okay too. I am going to start this chapter by stating directly that I own a dog, an American Eskimo, one of the many variants of the basic Spitz type. They were known as German Spitzes until the First World War made it verboten to admit that anything good could come from Germany. American Eskimos are among the most beautiful of dogs, with a pointed, classic wolf face, upright ears, a long, thick coat, and a curly tail. They are also very intelligent. Our dog, whose name is Sicko, which means ice, in an Inuit language, according to my daughter, who named him, learns tricks very rapidly and can do so even now that he's old. I taught him a new stunt recently when he turned 13. He already knew how to shake a paw and to balance a treat on his nose. I taught him to do both at the same time. However, it's not at all clear that he enjoys it. We bought Sicko for my daughter, Michaela, when she was about 10 years old. He was an unbearably cute pup, small nose and ears, rounded face, big eyes, awkward movements. These features automatically elicit caretaking behavior from humans, male and female alike. This was certainly the case with Michaela, who was also occupied with the care of bearded dragons, geckos, ball pythons, chameleons, iguanas, and a 20-pound, 32-inch-long Flemish giant rabbit named George, who nibbled on everything in the house and frequently escaped, to the great consternation of those who then spied his improbably large form in their tiny mid-city gardens. She had all these animals because she was allergic to the more typical pets, excepting Sicko, who had the additional advantage of being hypoallergenic. Sicko garnered 50 nicknames, we counted, which varied broadly in their emotional tone, and reflected both the affection in which he was held and our occasional frustration with his beastly habits. Scumdog was probably my favorite, but I also held Rathound, Furball, and Suckdog in rather high esteem. The kids used Sneak and Squeak, sometimes with an appended O, most frequently, but accompanied it with Snooky, Ugdog, and Snorfolopagus, horrible though it is to admit. Snorbs is Michaela's current moniker of choice. She uses it to greet him after a prolonged absence. For full effect, it must be uttered in a high-pitched and surprised voice. Sicko also happens to have his own Instagram hashtag #JudgmentalSicko. I am describing my dog instead of writing directly about cats because I don't wish to run afoul of a phenomenon known as minimal group identification, discovered by the social psychologist Henry Toffel. Toffel brought his research subjects into his lab and sat them down in front of a screen, onto which he flashed a number of dots. The subjects were asked to estimate their quantity. Then he categorized his subjects as overestimators versus underestimators, as well as accurate versus inaccurate, and put them into groups corresponding to their performance. Then he asked them to divide money among the members of all the groups. Toffel found that his subjects displayed a marked preference for their own group members, rejecting an egalitarian distribution strategy and disproportionately rewarding those with whom they now identified. Other researchers have assigned people to different groups using ever more arbitrary strategies, such as flipping a coin. It didn't matter. Even when the subjects were informed of the way the groups were composed, people still favored the co-members of their own personal group. Toffel's studies demonstrated two things. First, that people are social. Second, that people are antisocial. People are social because they like the members of their own group. People are antisocial because they don't like the members of other groups. Exactly why this is so has been the subject of continual debate. I think it might be a solution to a complex problem of optimization. Such problems arise, for example, when two or more factors are important, but none cannot be maximized without diminishing the others. A problem of this sort emerges, for example, because of the antipathy between cooperation and competition, both of which are socially and psychologically desirable. Cooperation is for safety, security, and companionship. Competition is for personal growth and status. However, if a given group is too small, it has no power or prestige and cannot fend off other groups. In consequence, being one of its members is not that useful. If the group is too large, however, the probability of climbing near or to the top declines, so it becomes too hard to get ahead. Perhaps people identify with groups at the flip of a coin because they deeply want to organize themselves, protect themselves, and still have some reasonable probability of climbing the dominance hierarchy. Then they favor their own group because favoring it helps it thrive, and climbing something that is failing is not a useful strategy. In any case, it is because of Toffel's minimal conditions discovery that I began this cat-related chapter with a description of my dog. Otherwise, the mere mention of a cat in the title would be enough to turn many dog people against me, just because I didn't include canines in the group of entities that should be petted. Since I also like dogs, there is no reason for me to suffer such a fate. So, if you like to pet dogs when you meet them on the street, don't feel obliged to hate me. Rest assured, instead, that this is also an activity of which I approve. I would also like to apologize to all the cat people who now feel slighted because they were hoping for a cat story, but had to read all this dog-related material. Perhaps they might be satisfied by some assurance that cats do illustrate the point I want to make better, and that I will eventually discuss them. First, however, to other things. Suffering and the limitations of being. The idea that life is suffering is a tenet, in one form or another, of every major religious doctrine, as we have already discussed. Buddhists state it directly. Christians illustrate it with the cross. Jews commemorate the suffering endured over the centuries. Such reasoning universally characterizes the great creeds, because human beings are intrinsically fragile. We can be damaged, even broken, emotionally and physically, and we are all subject to the depredations of aging and loss. This is a dismal set of facts, and it is reasonable to wonder how we can expect to thrive and be happy, or even to want to exist sometimes, under such conditions. I was speaking recently with a client whose husband had been engaging in a successful battle with cancer for an agonizing period of 5 years. They had both held up remarkably and courageously over this period. However, he fell prey to the tendency of that dread condition to metastasize and, in consequence, had been given very little time to live. It is perhaps hardest to hear terrible news like this when you are still in the fragile post-recovery state that occurs after dealing successfully with previous bad news. Tragedy at such a time seems particularly unfair. It is the sort of thing that can make you distrust even hope itself. It's frequently sufficient to cause genuine trauma. My client and I discussed a number of issues, some philosophical and abstract, some more concrete. I shared with her some of the thoughts that I developed about the whys and wherefores of human vulnerability. When my son Julian was about 3, he was particularly cute. He's 20 years older than that now, but still quite cute, a compliment I'm sure he'll particularly enjoy reading. Because of him, I thought a lot about the fragility of small children. A 3-year-old is easily damaged. Dogs can bite him, cars can hit him, mean kids can push him over. He can get sick, and sometimes did. Julian was prone to high fevers and the delirium they sometimes produce. Sometimes I had to take him into the shower with me and cool him off when he was hallucinating, or even fighting with me in his feverish state. There are few things that make it harder to accept the fundamental limitations of human existence than a sick child. Michaela, a year and a few months older than Julian, also had her problems. When she was 2, I would lift her up on my shoulders and carry her around. Kids enjoy that. Afterwards, however, when I put her feet back on the ground, she would sit down and cry. So I stopped doing it. That seemed to be the end of the problem, with a seemingly minor exception. My wife, Tammy, told me that something was wrong with Michaela's gait. I couldn't see it. Tammy thought it might be related to her reaction to being carried on my shoulders. Michaela was a sunny child and very easy to get along with. One day, when she was about 14 months old, I took her along with Tammy and her grandparents to Cape Cod when we lived in Boston. When we got there, Tammy and her mom and dad walked ahead and left me with Michaela in the car. We were in the front seat. She was lying there in the sun, babbling away. I leaned over to hear what she was saying. Happy, 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 happy. That's what she was like. When she turned 6, however, she started to get mopey. It was hard to get her out of bed in the morning. She put on her clothes very slowly. When we walked somewhere, she lagged behind. She complained that her feet hurt and that her shoes didn't fit. We bought her 10 different pairs, but it didn't help. She went to school and held her head up and behaved properly. But when she came home and saw her mom, she would break into tears. We had recently moved from Boston to Toronto and attributed these changes to the stress of the move, but it didn't get better. Michaela began to walk up and down stairs 1 step at a time. She began to move like someone much older. She complained if you held her hand. One time, much later, she asked me, "Dad, when you played this little piggy with me when I was little, was it supposed to hurt?" Things you learn too late. A physician at our local medical clinic told us, "Sometimes children have growing pains. They're normal. But you could think about taking her to see a physiotherapist." So we did. The physiotherapist tried to rotate Michaela's heel. It didn't move. That was not good. The physio told us, "Your daughter has juvenile rheumatoid arthritis." This was not what we wanted to hear. We did not like that physiotherapist. We went back to the medical clinic. Another physician there told us to take Michaela to the hospital for sick children. The doctor said, "Take her to the emergency room. That way, you will be able to see a rheumatologist quickly." Michaela had arthritis, all right. The physio, bearer of unwelcome news, was correct. 37 affected joints. Severe polyarticular juvenile idiopathic arthritis, or JIA. Cause unknown. Prognosis, multiple early joint replacements. What sort of God would make a world where such a thing could happen at all, much less to an innocent and happy little girl? It's a question of absolutely fundamental import for believer and non-believer alike. It's an issue addressed, as are so many difficult matters, in the Brothers Karamazov, the great novel by Dostoevsky, we began to discuss in Chapter 7. Dostoevsky expresses his doubts about the propriety of being through the character of Ivan, who, if you remember, is the articulate, handsome, sophisticated brother and greatest adversary of the monastic novitiate Alyosha. "It's not God who I don't accept. Understand this," says Ivan. "I do not accept the world that he created, this world of gods, and I cannot agree with it." Ivan tells Alyosha a story about a small girl whose parents punished her by locking her in a freezing outhouse overnight, a story Dostoevsky culled from a newspaper of his time. "Can you just see those two snoozing away while their daughter was crying all night?" says Ivan. "And imagine this little child, unable to understand what was happening to her, beating her frozen little chest and crying meek little tears, begging gentle Jesus to get her out of that horrible place. Alyosha, if you were somehow promised that the world could finally have complete and total peace, but only on the condition that you tortured one little child to death, say, that girl who was freezing in the outhouse, would you do it?" Alyosha demurs. "No, I would not," he says softly. He would not do what God seems to freely allow. I had realized something relevant to this years before about 3-year-old Julian. Remember him? I thought, I love my son. He's 3, and cute, and little, and comical, but I am also afraid for him, because he could be hurt. If I had the power to change that, what might I do? I thought. He could be 20 feet tall instead of 40 inches. Nobody could push him over then. He could be made of titanium instead of flesh and bone. Then if some brat bounced a toy truck off his noggin, he wouldn't care. He could have a computer-enhanced brain, and even if he was damaged somehow, his parts could be immediately replaced. Problem solved. But no, not problem solved. And not just because such things are currently impossible. Artificially fortifying Julian would have been the same as destroying him. Instead of his little 3-year-old self, he would be a cold, steel-hard robot. That would not be Julian. It would be a monster. I came to realize, through such thoughts, that what can be truly loved about a person is inseparable from their limitations. Julian wouldn't have been little and cute and lovable if he wasn't also prone to illness and loss and pain and anxiety. Since I loved him a lot, I decided that he was all right the way he was, despite his fragility. It has been harder with my daughter. As her disease progressed, I began to piggyback her around, not on my shoulders, when we went for walks. She started taking oral naproxen and methotrexate, the latter a powerful chemotherapy agent. She had a number of cortisol injections, wrists, shoulders, ankles, elbows, knees, hips, fingers, toes, and tendons, all under general anesthetic. This helped temporarily, but her decline continued. One day, Tammy took Michaela to the zoo. She pushed her around in a wheelchair. That was not a good day. Her rheumatologist suggested prednisone, a corticosteroid, long used to fight inflammation. But prednisone has many side effects, not the least of which is severe facial swelling. It wasn't clear that this was better than the arthritis, not for a little girl. Fortunately, if that is the right word, the rheumatologist told us of a new drug. It had been used previously, but only on adults. So Michaela became the first Canadian child to receive etanercept, a biological specifically designed for autoimmune diseases. Tammy accidentally administered 10 times the recommended dose, the first few injections. Poof! Michaela was fixed. A few weeks after the trip to the zoo, she was zipping around playing Little League soccer. Tammy spent all summer just watching her run. We wanted Michaela to control as much of her life as she could. She had always been strongly motivated by money. One day we found her outside, surrounded by the books of her early childhood, selling them to passers-by. I sat her down one evening and told her that I would give her $50 if she could do the injection herself. She was 8 years old. She struggled for 35 minutes, holding the needle close to her thigh. Then she did it. Next time, I paid her $20. but only gave her 10 minutes. Then it was $10 and 5 minutes. We stayed at 10 for quite a while. It was a bargain. After a few years, Michaela became completely symptom-free. The rheumatologist suggested that we start weaning her off of her medications. Some children grow out of JIA when they hit puberty. No one knows why. She began to take methotrexate in pill form instead of injecting it. Things were good for 4 years. Then, one day, her elbow started to ache. We took her back to the hospital. "You only have one actively arthritic joint," said the rheumatologist's assistant. It wasn't only. 2 isn't much more than 1, but 1 is a lot more than 0. 1 meant she hadn't grown out of her arthritis, despite the hiatus. The news demolished her for a month, but she was still in dance class and playing ball games with her friends on the street in front of our house. The rheumatologist had some more unpleasant things to say the next September, when Michaela started grade 11. An MRI revealed joint deterioration at the hip. She told Michaela, "Your hip will have to be replaced before you turn 30. Perhaps the damage had been done before the etanercept worked its miracle." We didn't know. It was ominous news. One day, a few weeks after, Michaela was playing ball hockey in her high school gym. Her hip locked up. She had to hobble off the court. It started to hurt more and more. The rheumatologist said, "Some of your femur appears to be dead. You don't need a hip replacement when you're 30. You need one now." As I sat with my client, as she discussed her husband's advancing illness, we discussed the fragility of life, the catastrophe of existence, and the sense of nihilism evoked by the specter of death. I started with my thoughts about my son. She had asked, like everyone in her situation, "Why my husband? Why me? Why this?" My realization of the tight interlinking between vulnerability and being was the best answer I had for her. I told her an old Jewish story, which I believe is part of the commentary on the Torah. It begins with a question, structured like a Zen koan. Imagine a being who is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. What does such a being lack? The answer? Limitation. If you are already everything, everywhere, always, there is nowhere to go and nothing to be. Everything that could be already is, and everything that could happen already has. And it is for this reason, so the story goes, that God created man. No limitation, no story. No story, no being. That idea has helped me deal with the terrible fragility of being. It helped my client, too. I don't want to overstate the significance of this. I don't want to claim that this somehow makes it all okay. She still faced the cancer afflicting her husband, just as I still faced my daughter's terrible illness. But there's something to be said for recognizing that existence and limitation are inextricably linked. Though 30 spokes may form the wheel, it is the hole within the hub which gives the wheel utility. It is not the clay the potter throws which gives the pot its usefulness, but the space within the shape from which the pot is made. Without a door the room cannot be entered, and without its windows it is dark. Such is the utility of non-existence. A realization of this sort emerged more recently in the pop culture world, during the evolution of the DC Comics cultural icon Superman. Superman was created in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. In the beginning, he could move cars, trains, and even ships. He could run faster than a locomotive. He could leap over tall buildings in a single bound. As he developed over the next 4 decades, however, Superman's power began to expand. And by the late 60s, he could fly faster than light. He had super hearing and X-ray vision. He could blast heat rays from his eyes. He could freeze objects and generate hurricanes with his breath. He could move entire planets. Nuclear blasts didn't faze him. And if he did get hurt, somehow, he would immediately heal. Superman became invulnerable. Then a strange thing happened.
He got boring. The more amazing his abilities became, the harder it was to think up interesting things for him to do. DC first overcame this problem in the 1940s. Superman became vulnerable to the radiation produced by kryptonite, a material remnant of his shattered home planet. Eventually, more than 24 emerged. Um,
Well, assuming that you can still hear me, I am very sorry about the technical difficulties. We will have to continue where we left off in a future stream. I hope you gained some comfort, or maybe at least some insight from at least some aspect of this stream. And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Sweetest dreaming, whether wake or sleep. Nighty night.